Housing demand is expected to crash. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Let's have a look at this article from Yahoo Finance that makes reference to concerns that housing demand is expected to crash here in Australia. Remember, housing, just a small part of our economy that a few people dabble in. It's not like there's TV shows promoting it and every man and his dog thinks buying 5 houses and negative gearing them paying interest only is the best way to build wealth. We don't need innovation in the innovation nation. Don't worry. Economic complexity, that's for advanced countries. Pandemic to cut demand for housing. The coronavirus pandemic could cut demand for housing in Australia by between 129,000 and 232,000 dwellings over the next 3 years, research by a federal government agency shows. The National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation study found that population growth could be cut by 214,000 between 2019 and 2021, a 0.8% decline only surpassed by World War I and the unwinding of the 1971 baby boom. This is the result of international border closures that have effectively shut down net overseas migration, which has accounted for 59% of population growth since 2007. Now, the problem with this is our GDP, per capita GDP growth, has actually been below trend since the GFC. So our population is growing and our GDP is growing. It's still going up. But per person, that growth is diminishing. We're below trend. Our economy, the performance of our economy has been depressed since the GFC. We're in trouble, everyone. Australia's in trouble. And of course, the government is going to do the same old trick. Housing, migration, foreign investment. That's the problem. International students account for 50% of migration, and the study notes COVID-19 hotspots such as India and Brazil are large contributors to Australia's pool of students. The research highlights the strong relationship between population growth, increasingly through net overseas migration, and underlying dwelling demand, with the outlook for population growth due to COVID-19 highly uncertain, the corporation's chief executive, Nathan Dolborn, said. Evidence from the GFC suggests economic factors such as the unemployment rate and the exchange rate are also important for international students in selecting Australia. It took around 4 years after the GFC for student numbers to recover to pre-GFC levels, the report said. The past 2 recessions also show rising unemployment tends to lead a decline in national population growth. Australia's second wave of infections is likely to further slow population growth, adding to the depth of the downturn and hindering the pace of the recovery in underlying housing demand. Now, one thing we looked at was just employment. Employment here in Australia. We'll look at this. And it was about, at the recession Australia had to have, just looking at the employment rate, it was about a decade before we hit that level. So just before we plunged, it took 10 years to reach that employment rate again. Just think about that. So let's have a look at this. This is the report that they're making reference to, and it is from the Australian Housing, Finance and Investment Corporation. I mean, you can tell me why we need a corporation like that, a government body to juice up our housing industry. I mean, there we go. Is it just another potato board like in Western Australia? So let's look at the key insights. The global pandemic could cut underlying dwelling demand in Australia by between 129 and 232 houses. Just think about that, or that decline in dwelling. Now, let's look at what building approvals that have shot up. Look at that. We're up to, 8,700 houses a month? And maybe, a little bit off, 13,800 apartments. This is a big number. This is going to be a big dent. So from 20 to 23. So construction, maybe the trades are going to cop it over the next few years, guys. Mainly due to the downturn in net overseas migration. International border closures have effectively shut down NOM, which accounts for 59% of population growth since 2007. The most pessimistic scenario implies a reduction in the population increase from peak to trough of 214,000 from 2019 to 2021. This implies a decline of 0.8% of the population over the 2-year period, which has only been surpassed by World War I and the unwinding of the baby boom in 71. International students are the swing factor, accounting for 50% of net overseas migration. I mean, that tells you. That tells you right there. Should our nation be in a situation where we're so dependent on housing, housing is a majority of our wealth, a big portion of our wealth is put into housing. And the average person is going to feel this. So let's say, the dollar adjusts, or, the dollar drops down to the US, and then iron exports are more affordable. Fantastic. But our day-to-day costs go up of all the imported products. So it's going to be good. There'll be more money flowing in through the export part of the economy. But what is the average punter going to feel first? What's going to be the flow-on effects? What do you reckon? Let me know in the comments, guys. And then what will the average punter feel first? And that will flow on to their behavior and their confidence, and that will have a snowballing effect. The geographic composition of the student community is also relevant, given the hotspots of India and Brazil are large contributors to the pool of students. The GFC revealed the economic factors, including unemployment, exchange rate, are important for international students. That's it. I mean, how much bang they can get for their currency here in Australia is an important thing, because we're the poor man's America. Honestly, we are the poor man's America. If you're going from Southeast Asia, you can go to the States and get a degree at a well-known university. You can come over here and get a degree from an okay-known university on a global scale. So it took 4 years for student numbers to recover to pre-GFC levels. A protracted COVID-19 recession could easily lead to a similar path of recovery once the borders reopen. Large falls in underlying dwelling demand, particularly due to substantial falls in international students, already putting upward pressure on vacancy rates and downward pressure on rents in inner city suburbs. If sustained, this could cause a contraction in construction activity that will add to the recessionary forces that are impacting the economy. Previous recessions paint a relatively consistent picture of the outlook for the natural population increase. It tends to decline after the unemployment rate has peaked. So what do we have here? The underlying demand for new private dwellings, including vacant dwellings versus pre-COVID. So here's scenario 1, 2, 3, and there's the difference. So here's pre-COVID levels, and you can see scenario 2 is 399 total. It's showing you just the drop in dwellings. So this is the worst case. So what do we have here? We've got the introduction. Let's just have a look at this report. Let's see if we see anything here. We'll just go through this. Many governments around the world have responded to the spread of COVID-19 by prioritizing community health over economic growth. This approach was, I would argue by prioritizing one aspect of community health. One aspect of a community health. Being, locked down and having your freedoms restricted is going to kind of affect your mental health, Having your business destroyed is going to affect your mental health, is going to have other impacts. This approach was taken after weighing up the effect of an uncontained spread of the virus versus the economic and social cost of job losses. Really? Was that done? Have anyone seen that report? Has anyone seen that economic assessment? All I've seen is criticism of Sweden, who've taken a different approach. Imposing social distancing and limiting people's movements has had important consequences for the housing market. As the initial outbreak of COVID-19 was contained, these measures were gradually eased. However, Victoria's experience shows easing can be quickly reversed if the virus begins to spread again. In Australia, international and domestic travel has been cut aggressively, with both international and state borders not fully open. In particular, international border closures have shut down net overseas migration, which is the key driver of population growth in Figure 2. Indeed, since 2007, it averaged 59% of total population growth. The data also shows it is more cyclical than the natural rate of increase, and we can see here. There you go. I need to incorporate this chart. Our population growth is definitely increasing. Border closures between states have disrupted interstate migration and domestic tourism. The economic consequences of the lockdown also impacts population growth. The past 2 recessions showed that rising unemployment tends to lead to a decline in natural population growth. The pandemic has also raised uncertainty uncertainty about the path back to normalization is battering confidence and affecting business investments in hiring. Of course it is. I mean, I remember when the Reserve Bank was trying to push loans to business. Who would go and borrow now? I don't understand. Unless you're in, I don't know, unless you've got government contracts out the wazoo or something. Who would borrow now? It has also reduced the willingness of households to spend, with flow-on effects to the housing market. In this paper, we analyse the impact of COVID-19 on population growth and underlying housing demand through two lenses: the direct health policy measures to minimise the spread of the virus, the consequences and larger economic cost of applying public health policy. So, Figure 3 illustrates the framework used to assess the impact of COVID-19 on population growth. Using this framework, we developed 3 scenarios for the impact on underlying housing demand. A scenario analysis is more appropriate at this juncture given the high level of uncertainty about the depth and downturn of the shape of the economy. So they looked at factors impacting population growth, the economy: natural population increase, recession, slow natural population increase, interstate migration. Changes to internal migration affect some states and territories more than others, overseas migration. International students, who account for 50% of immigration, are less likely to be self-funded. There's less demand for skilled migrants, who account for 20% of immigration. Well, that's just to do with our economic complexity, guys. Demand for working holiday immigrants falls if unemployment is higher in Australia than the rest of the world. House prices, interstate migration. Queensland moves the dial on interstate migration. Relative house price movements between Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane drive interstate migration. Health measures, border closures internationally. Immigration cuts have flow-on effects on population growth. Temporary international student immigrants are the main driver of population growth. So state border closures limit interstate migration. As the main destination for interstate migrants, Queensland's border closures are particularly significant. Well, Queensland is the best state. So scenarios of underlying demand. And what I think we'll do is, I will go through this in another paper in greater detail, but it's interesting to see. Let's jump down. Let's have a look. Okay, hang on. Wait. We want to see scenario 1. Scenario 1, this is based on a relative shallow downward turn that sees student visas returning to pre-pandemic levels by 2027. 2027, everyone. And a shallow downturn. It assumes that numbers in 2021 will have declined by 50% compared to 2019 levels. A recovery is anticipated to begin in 2022, which is consistent with the average pace of growth seen during the 3 years prior to the pandemic. So this is international student numbers, and they're expecting 2027. And this scenario was this one up here. Scenario 1, 129,000 decline. I'm just going to snap this so we can look at it in the scenarios. 2027, everyone. What does that tell you? Because there's flow-on effects on the economy, on a whole lot of the economy because of this. There's other employment, there's other jobs, there's people that work. How do we get to a point where we're so dependent on international students for our housing market? Everyone. Scenario 2. In this scenario, we assume, and this is the one down here, are we ever going to return? In this scenario, we assume a deeper and more prolonged downturn, but with a similar pace of recovery. This is consistent with COVID-19 infections continuing to rise globally, which will delay border openings and economic recovery. Between 21 and 23, the downturn is consistent with the average pace of the downturn seen during the GFC. But, I mean, if we look at our GDP, if we look at, hang on, I'm going to bring this up here, everyone. If we look at our, nope, okay, I've got to update my GDP growth rate. I always threaten to actually update this, but I haven't done it yet. But if we look at the growth rate here, everyone, look at that. Okay, look at that. We'll go max. Where's the GFC? Do you even see it? Do you even notice it? Is it even worth comparing it to that? Is it worth comparing it to the 90s recession? The recovery begins in 2024. at a similar pace to the strong growth in student visas in 2013-16, the deeper downturn relative to scenario 1 means that by 2027, visas are only at 65% pre-pandemic levels. We're talking 2027 here. We're talking 7 years in the future, everyone. We're talking when I'm worried about hitting 50 and we'll still be at 65% of pre-pandemic levels. And this is international students. And there's a big part of our economy dependent on it. So what about, and that's scenario 2 is a fall of a difference of 232,000. So where's scenario 3? I want to see scenario 3. New Zealand citizens, population growth, underlying housing demand. Where's scenario 3? Conclusion. Well, we'll jump to the conclusion. So, the health response to COVID-19 has created a formidable roadblock and highly uncertain outlook for population growth and demand for housing. Underlying dwelling demand could fall between 129,000 and 232,000 between 2020 and 2023 under the 3 scenarios we considered in this paper. If this decline is sustained, it could cause a contraction in construction activity that will add to the recessionary forces impacting the economy. Net overseas migration accounts for around 60% of the population growth, with about 50% of this due to international students. This demographic likely lives near inner city peripheries and in apartment-style accommodation, with the bulk in capital cities in the eastern state. The composition of international student intake is relevant, with Brazil and India among the largest providers of students to Australia, suffering greatly from the unchecked spread of the pandemic. But what if they get herd immunity? Will we let them over? We don't have it. That's another question. The experience during the GFC shows that international students are susceptible to global economic and financial conditions, and this provides an added long-term layer of risk. While opening the borders may lift student numbers, the economic fallout from the pandemic means it may take several years for student numbers to return to pre-pandemic levels. Additionally, the natural population increase tends to fall after the unemployment rate peaks. Australia's second wave of infections is likely to further slow population growth, adding to the depth of the downturn and hindering the pace of recovery in underlying housing demand. What do you think, guys? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and want to support the content I create, there are a few ways you can. You can join the channel on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us using our affiliate links at Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or Kucoin. Buy our merch from HeiseSays. Use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, or support us via PayPal. Take care. I'll see you next time.